Going to get a chance for a 90-second rebuttal from everyone. We'll start back here where we started before with Jeff.
Thank you very much. I wanted to point out we have a packet of information on that table over there in this yellow thing. And if you take it when you go out, I'd appreciate it. Read it over. It has our PowerPoint and a bunch of information on this proposal in there. And I think you might find it helpful. I want to point out a few ironies with regard to the arguments of the proponents of this initiative that have come to light in their presentations. One, that the motor vehicle excise tax is the most hated tax. I don't know how you measure hatred, and I don't know whether you want to build public policy on the basis of hatred. I would think that studies and surveys show that the most tax sensitivity, as it's called, is with regard to the real estate property tax and not the motor vehicle excise tax. Secondly, that the motor vehicle excise tax is regressive is flatly wrong. The motor vehicle excise tax, as established in 1929, is a highly progressive tax system with regard to this tax rate, assuming a correlation between the ability to buy a new car and the ability to pay a relatively higher mill rate on the excise tax associated with that new car. It's a very steep, progressive rate structure which our forefathers and their forefathers developed over 80 years ago. The third irony is that this initiative is out there to help the low-income people of this state. This initiative doesn't do anything for the low-income people of the state, assuming that they're unable to buy new cars, except make their roads worse and their property taxes higher. But I'm not buying this correlation between low-income people and the benefits of this proposal, the way it's structured. And finally, and this takes more time than I'm allowed, but there's an irony with regard, especially in this forum, with Steve Faust here and Eddie Barrett here and Clint Duchesne here and these municipal people here, that the property tax relief that was provided to these communities in this region associated with increased spending for education was not used for property tax relief purposes. Brewer and Bangor are poster child for accounting for that increased property tax education funding and getting it back to their property taxpayers. That's my time. More later.
I always find it amusing to hear that the excise tax is over 80 years old. I don't personally get a sense of nostalgia when I have to go to the town office and pay my excise tax. And I also find it amusing that some of the opponents up here are using the reason of maintaining a city pool to prevent tax relief. The fact is, question 2 is an opportunity to create that tax relief. And the doom and gloom arguments by many of the opponents out there are meant to scare voters into opposing real tax relief for their families. Question 2, again, vote yes, pay less. We have an opportunity to put more money back in our pockets, and the doom and gloom arguments of cutting services and raising property taxes and the class warfare arguments that are being incorporated into this campaign are simply wrong. Mainers are paying too much in excise taxes, and question 2 is a chance to solve that problem, reduce their excise taxes, and improve their financial futures.
Wow, I wasn't going to say anything. I can tell you that the LD1 is the legislation that the city lives under, and we have to comply with it. The city of Old Town and many of the communities definitely have been turning back to the citizens that tax dollar, that tax savings, as Jeff has mentioned. My concern is that this is not equal to all. Whether or not you're low income or high income, it's based on if you get an older vehicle, you're not going to get anything out of this. And whether the city pool is saved or not is an issue that's locally looked at on a wider issue, not part of this excise tax. It just happens to be one of the things that we have. We're looking at curbside pickup of service of garbage, recyclables. I don't have kids in the school. I live in Old Town during the week, and I live in East Millinocket on the weekend. Curbside pickup is a service near and dear to my heart. I put it out and it disappears, and I don't have to think about it. So it's quality of life issues and the things that most people are going to be looking at in terms of what they can do in their lives. So it's not so much about looking at a particular piece of infrastructure that the city has. Every town has these particular components, and they're all going to be looking at that.
Thank you. I think there's a few important points. First of all, I don't think that the Maine Municipal Association has credibility saying that this question is wrong because it doesn't cut all auto excise tax rates. I'm not aware of one effort that they have undertaken in the last 80 years to reduce Maine's auto excise taxes. Question 2 is the first step to lower Maine's auto excise taxes. And if Jeff wants to sponsor another initiative that would cut auto excise taxes for cars that are more than 6 years, I'd be happy to jump on board. But I think that we need to take incremental progress and reduce Maine's high auto excise tax. The other thing that's important to remember is the auto excise tax is the only tax solely paid by Maine residents. If you buy into this argument that it's used to fund local roads, then the question is, there are a lot more people driving on local roads who aren't Maine residents. Why don't we look at some kind of funding that reflects the cost of local roads on everybody who's driving on them, whether it's the tens of millions of tourists who come into the state, out-of-staters who own property in Maine, or others. It shouldn't be all on the backs of Maine residents. 7th highest rate in the country, we can lower it.
We'll start now. Question 3, again, another 3 minutes, and then a 90-second rebuttal. We've touched on it a little bit, but let's touch on the municipal budgets and operations. If question 2 passes, what do you see as the appropriate or necessary step for municipalities to take in order to offset a net loss of revenue?
Well, I think, I appreciate the question. I think the important thing to look at is how can we have some balance between what's going on in government, in the public sector, and what's going on in the private sector. Today in Maine, there are 13,000 fewer people working in the private sector than we had 9 years ago. But in the public sector, state and local government jobs are up 3,400. We've seen spending at the local level grow at twice the rate of inflation. Property taxes up during that same period, 58%. To me, this is about priorities. Towns and local governments need to look to see what kind of efficiencies they can find. And after question 4 passes, if they do want to pass along all these costs onto the property taxpayer, at least property taxpayers will have an opportunity to vote on this. I think that it's very important that we have some balance between what's going on in the private sector, where people are losing their jobs and facing significant pay cuts, and some balance with the public sector, which seems to get as much money as they did last year and then a little bit more, and are never forced to look at efficiencies and savings. I don't think that we can spend our way to prosperity. I think we need to look at how do we have an affordable balance between our high taxes in Maine, and in particular, this high tax that only affects Maine residents.
Thank you. This is a community-by-community basis that everybody's going to have to look at this. Do you increase the property tax rate to the tune of what you've lost, which for us is over $1 million in Old Town, which is about $475,000 is a mill for the city of Old Town. Our loss is over $500,000. So, or do you eliminate services? You have to go through this whole process, which we're undertaking, we've been doing for the last 3 months, to look at the services. It's a huge step to take, and from the time that it's voted in to the time that it's enacted will be a struggle for some of these towns. The city demographics in Old Town in 2006, according to the census, is we have about 8,100 people in the city. 364 are under 5 years old, 1,032 are school age between 5 and 17 years old, and 6,700 plus are 18 years or older. That tells me that that segment of the sector, the population, needs to be serviced. And some of the things that they like to have are roads. They like to have them swept. They like to have the sand put down, the salt put down. They like to be able to be safe. They like to have sidewalks. There's particular quality of life requirements that this sector is going to demand in order to like living in the community that they live in. And so we have to balance that with the needs of the smaller population. A lot of things that the cities and towns have to deal with are mandated services. Some things mandated through state law that we can't do without. We have to have certain things. Unless we want to deorganize and become an unorganized community, we have to have certain services, and we have to provide that. So, for instance, I just lost my finance director to public sector, which is pretty interesting. Came yesterday, and they're paying him $30,000 more than I'm paying him. And it's, when you talk about lost industries and the downturn in the private sector, he's going back to Old Town Fuel and Fiber is what he's doing. And so that industry has an upswing, and that pendulum is starting to swing that way. So there's a bit of a drift, and we have this struggle between keeping people intact and employed as well in the city and not having to lose it. So if any of you know of a good finance director,